All right, so today we are going to do something a little different, and we are interviewing cinematographer Zach Kuperstein. He is a New York-based DP. He has shot films such as Barbarian, which many of you might be familiar with, which topped the American box office for several weeks. He also shot a film called The Eyes of My Mother, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2016. He has also worked with Anna Kendrick, film Woman of the Hour, and has been lauded by awards from a bunch of different film festivals and organizations around the world. So if you aren't familiar with his work, definitely check it out. If you are, then, we're talking with someone that has an incredible resume. But for now, he is going to focus a little bit more on what is happening with Local 600 and IATSE, and I'll just let you take it away. So welcome to the show, Zach.
Wow. Thanks so much for having me, David. I appreciate it. And just a longtime fan of the podcast and everything you do with Cinematography Salon. So it's great to be here and talking with you, especially about the business of the business. I think it's a really important thing that we don't hear as much about from DPs. And, I think back to when I was just getting started, I read a book called Masters of Light, which had a little bit of, insight around the lighting and, technical stuff of cinematography, but it was much more about the lifestyles and philosophy of these people. So I'm here and very excited to be talking about exactly that. So, let's kick it off.
Yeah, it's a great book. One of the things that influenced me early on as well.
Yeah.
So fantastic. How about you give us a little bit of a high-level overview of, what is happening with the elections and what is happening with the unions and the business, and then we can kind of dive down into more details.
Yeah, absolutely. So right at this moment, today, April 7th, Monday, the ballots have just opened for Local 600's internal elections. So that's going to be electing our national executive officers, the people who will be on the National Executive Board, and our delegates to the international, the IA. So there's a lot happening at this exact moment, and I happen to be running for a position to be on the board and to be an IA delegate. And this summer is coming the international convention, the quadrennial international convention. It happens only once every 4 years. This year it's going to be happening in Hawaii. And as a delegate, I hope to go and represent Local 600 in that realm as well. That's kind of where we're at right now.
Fantastic. So what prompted you to run for office?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's been a little bit of a journey over the last few years, learning a bit more about how IATSE and how Local 600 work together and independently. It's the last couple of contract negotiation cycles have really been eye-opening, or not eye-opening enough. And maybe that's sort of my frustration with it, where I really want to learn about how it works and have had difficulty finding those resources and difficulty understanding really what's happening in the room during those negotiations. So in learning about that, experiencing a couple of roadblocks and frustrations, I've gotten more involved with some other folks who are in other locals, interested in making some change in IATSE broadly. And all of that kind of led me to realize, maybe I could do something for Local 600 and get involved. So yeah, that kind of got me excited about it. And seeing some of those other people stepping up and trying to take leadership roles as well was inspiring. So yeah, also I should say, as a DP, it feels kind of like a natural place to lead from, right? It's we find ourselves often as the point person on set and acting as middle management. There's a lot of politics that go into being a DP and trying to keep the crew happy and also serve the director and production to the best of your ability. So, it feels like a natural stepping stone, a natural transition into leading our union a little bit. I definitely don't want to be the leader. I don't think I'm prepared for that, but just to dip my toes and try to get involved a little bit more. I should also say that, as DPs, we're enormously privileged in being the point person on set and often being paid way above scale, and not necessarily living or dying on these exact contracts. It's we're lucky enough to kind of be able to negotiate our own contracts, and often have agents who do those negotiations for us. So, I feel like in some ways the stakes for me personally are not as high as they might be for others, but I want to use that position and this platform as a DP to be able to advocate for the people who really need it and bring up the below the line as much as possible.
Absolutely. Oh, that's great. And, in my experience too, it's, being a DP, there's very little of it that's actually creative. It's actually shooting. The vast majority of it, it's your prep, it's your politics, it's your deal making and your negotiations and just keeping, people happy on set and managing, your crew and managing your producers and your director and all that. As someone that runs a lot of community with the Salon, for example, we do a lot of events. It's that leadership role, I think, both comes naturally, but also I do think that we have we almost have like a mandate, to get people together and to lead people and make sure that a rising tide lifts all boats. So when things are going well, we should be uplifting people, and when things are going poorly, we should be helping the people that need it the most.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, we often talk about above the line and below the line. And I think the DP is the line. If there's anybody else who would be the DP. So like you said, we do have to kind of thread that needle and serve both sides of it.
Absolutely. Well, let's go back a little bit. So in 2021, we had just basically started coming out of COVID, which was a disaster for the entire world, disaster for our industry. Come out of COVID, and we start hitting a round of contract negotiations. This is right before the strikes by SAG and the writers and whatnot. And we did have some votes that our membership was unhappy with, and voted to reject the basic agreement overwhelmingly. I think I remember it was like high 90s. It was like 97% or something like that, right?
Well, I think there's a couple of numbers in there and different milestones in that process that I think are kind of worth separating out. So as far as I understand, the timeline of it was the negotiations were kind of happening throughout the summer, and most of the membership of any of the locals probably not too aware that it was even happening at all. And then at some point in the late summer, it may have been more like October. Sorry if I don't remember the exact dates, but there was a message sent out from Matt Loeb, the IATSE president, who is the lead negotiator for the Hollywood Basic Agreement, this contract we're talking about. And it was a call for a strike authorization vote. So in order to have a strike happen, the president has to, get the authority from the members in order to do that, which is a great mechanic. I think it's really important that the members can vote on that. And the reason he called for that is because the AMPTP, the Association of Motion Picture and Television Producers, who are the employers in this context, they had walked away from the bargaining table, as far as I understand. And my details on this are hazy because I was only just learning about it as it was happening. But they left the bargaining table and were not interested in pursuing any of the proposals that the union had been bringing, and it kind of reached a standstill. So the only thing to do would be let's see if we can mobilize some members and have a strike. So we called for this authorization vote, and an unprecedented number of people even participated in the vote. Something in the high 90s, I think it was like 98 or so % of the members affected by this contract participated in it. And then of the people who participated in the vote, something like 99% of those people voted to authorize a strike. So that was an enormous backing, to our negotiating committees and provided a lot of steam for them to get the producers to come back to the table. They did, but it took some time. And the reason it took some time is because the strike was then planned. I think it was a couple of weeks or so later, or it had been planned a couple of weeks out from when the vote was taken. And I believe it was on a Monday that the strike would officially start. So on Friday, before that, everybody had packed up their bags from set if they were coming back on Monday, took home all their tools and equipment, and had assumed that they would just be picketing on Monday. But instead, late Sunday, I believe, the day before the strike started, that's when the producers came back to the bargaining table. So they returned just in the nick of time, and the strike was called off in that moment. So that put a lot of people in a really difficult position, just trying to figure out what's going on, figure out are we striking, are we not, do we need to go home and get our tools, and what's like the right thing to do there. And at that point, negotiations resumed. And there was also little information about what was happening during the negotiations. And this was one of the things that kind of got me fired up. I was like, well, what are we striking about? What are we supposed to be caring about here? And, there was kind of a narrative being played out on social media mostly about long working hours, trying to limit days to 12 on, 12 off, pushes for health insurance eligibility, lifting up the living wages for the lowest earners, things like that. So, but all of that was kind of coming from a social media push and friends of mine and people I was just kind of hearing from. And it was essentially hearsay. Like nothing was actually coming from, no information was coming from the negotiating committee directly and saying, this is what we're fighting for, this is what we're here for. A few weeks go by, the negotiations continue, and they deliver what's called a tentative agreement. So that was where the producers and the union had decided, okay, we've come to an agreement on this. These are the terms of what the contract is going to be. There's still some legal language that has to get worked out, but we're at a place where we can get this ratified. And ratifying means the members have to vote on whether or not they accept the contract that has been agreed to by our negotiating committee. This particular agreement, the Hollywood Basic Agreement, is unique compared to all of the other IATSE contracts that are negotiated because it does constitutionally require a member vote on for ratification. Some other contracts do also get that vote, but it's not required by the Constitution to do that. So a vote was had. Ballots went out to members. Do you approve of or reject this contract? The contract terms, in my opinion, were not great. I didn't really have much of a understanding at that point of what kind of gains we could be getting, what things should be focused on. I had no sense of what the rest of the members wanted. And again, I was fortunate enough to have contracts negotiated by my agent on most of the jobs I'm working on. And I had barely even worked on any union jobs to begin with, despite being a union member, which is a whole other issue. So anyway, this contract comes out. Personally, I voted against it, despite a lot of pressure from our leadership to approve it. It felt like there was some missing information here. And the narrative from the leadership at that point was, we have to vote for this. We have to approve of this. And it's the best contract we can get. We've done a really great job in the negotiating room. The only option really is to vote yes on this. At this time, there were also, there was some discussion about what would be the ramifications of us not approving a contract, right? And there was a lot of hearsay again. One of the things that I heard, and I'm not exactly sure of the source of this, and it's my own fault that I didn't look into it, but one of the things that I heard was that if we were to vote no on this, we would go back to the negotiating table and ask for more, which it sounds like people want. People wanted, tighter control of the hours, especially 12 on, 12 off was a big push at that time. And in doing so, in going back to the negotiating table, that would be what's called regressive bargaining. It turns out that's not true at all. And again, from what I've heard and only hearsay, and against my fault, I haven't read a memo from a specific lawyer about this, but my understanding is that this was coming from the union's lawyers saying we can't do this. This is regressive bargaining if we go back. And regressive bargaining is a legal issue. It's not allowed by the Department of Labor in the way that these things are negotiated. So I was like, okay, well, I guess we can't go back to the table, but I'm still going to vote no because I don't really feel good about this contract. At that point, the votes were tallied. Local 600 represents the largest number of members of any of the locals in IATSE and also of any of the locals within the Hollywood bargaining unit. And we found out that Local 600, as a local, had rejected the contract. A majority of members of Local 600 who voted turned it down. But the way the system had been set up, was in the fashion of an electoral college, which you were alluding to. So that means that each local kind of had their votes tallied within their local, and the majority within that would determine how their electoral votes would be cast on whole, right? Exactly the same way that the U.S. electoral college system works. So if a slim majority of people from Massachusetts vote in favor of one candidate, all of Massachusetts electoral votes, which are proportional to their population, same as the proportionate number of votes in the case of these locals, would be cast for that one candidate. And when all this had kind of shaken out and the numbers were tallied, the electoral votes of the Hollywood 13 locals that participate in the Hollywood bargaining unit, when all those votes have been tallied, the contract was ratified. But if you counted just the majority of the votes of the members who voted, not the electoral votes, the majority of those votes were in favor of rejecting the contract. So, this exact situation had happened, I think, 2 of the U.S. Cycles of elections. I can't remember which ones. I think it was the Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump election in 2016, right? The majority of people who voted in that election, voted for Hillary Clinton, but the majority of the electoral votes were cast for Donald Trump. So Donald Trump won the election by that metric, right? Same exact thing happened in 2021 with the Hollywood the Hollywood Basic Agreement, which was then ratified. That is shocking to me, was shocking to me. I hate that system exists, in our U.S. electoral politics, and I hate that it exists in this context, and I don't think anybody really knew that it existed in the context of this contract ratification until after the votes had been tallied. So overall, pretty shocking and surprising, and it led me on a journey of trying to understand what exactly is the mechanism that determined that was the system. So I started reading. I read the Local 600 Constitution and Bylaws. I read the IATSE Constitution and Bylaws. I was looking for some kind of policy or rule or anything that would describe an electoral college system as we see in the U.S. Constitution, right? It just doesn't exist in there. In the IATSE Constitution. It does, like I said, mention that this specific contract has to be voted on by the members, but it doesn't specify anything about an electoral college system, a delegate representative system for contract ratification, or anything. So I'm like, well, we should change that. That seems like something that should go in the Constitution.
Absolutely. I mean, I personally am very much against the electoral college in this country to begin with. I don't think land should have more voting rights than people. It's like one person, one vote, right? Yeah. And, whether or not one can say, oh, like, I didn't know, like, I should have educated myself more. I can say that in my experience, going through that electoral process in 2021, I was completely surprised that there was this kind of system in place, especially when we had the membership voting almost as one at the time. So that to me was quite shocking, as you said as well. And I'm very glad that people are actually getting up and doing something about it, because I could see the framers doing it in the Constitution because the world was a different place 250 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. But, one would think that a more contemporary organization and a smaller organization would have something that's a little bit more transparent and a little bit more that embraces the will of the majority of its members.
Yeah, you would think, and you'd hope so.
Yeah. But that makes me glad that you're going through, you're doing all the research, and you're creating a plan of action going forward. So what I would love to talk about there is, what kinds of things, having done this research, having gone through this process, and now running, for office, like what kinds of things would you change, and what are like the top few things that are most important to you here?
Well, I think it's important to kind of recognize there are 2 different realms here. There's Local 600 and then there's IATSE, right? IATSE is this broader organization, and, whether or not we like it, we're tied to it as part of this bargaining unit, right? And I think it's also really important to point out that this Hollywood basic agreement that we've been talking about is just one of many contracts. And that contract, it really sets the tone for any of the other negotiations that do happen. And that's called pattern bargaining, where a kind of major contract is negotiated by some group of people, and then other people are kind of forced on those contract terms. Could be beneficial in some cases where they're getting the benefits of the larger solidarity group that is, getting good terms, but more often than not, it means that those people are kind of effectively disenfranchised because they don't get to have a voice in how that their contract is negotiated. Local 52, for example, in New York, represents the studio mechanics, but kind of a broad swath of crafts in the film industry. And, they are not part of the Hollywood bargaining unit. Their contract is not the basic agreement. They have the majors agreement that is negotiated separately and several months later. And they are kind of dealt the same terms as the Hollywood basic agreement, but they don't get to participate in that negotiation. That seems like an issue, right? You're asking about what I think should be changed in each of these realms, and for me, it really comes down to the way the structures are set up create these examples of disenfranchisement, and that needs to change before any of the specific policy or specific contract demands can change, right? If we're unable to directly elect our leaders, as is the case with IATSE broadly, then we can't be sure that those people are representing the voices of all the members, right? And thus, when they are in the room negotiating for us, they're not necessarily fighting for the things that matter to us, right? So,
can you talk about that a little more? The directly electing the leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. So and again, I need to draw the distinction between IATSE and Local 600 here, and I think it's easy to confuse the two. So IATSE is the organization, the umbrella organization of all of film, theater, live events, any kind of entertainment industry behind the scenes work, right? It's huge. We have 200,000 IATSE members, and about a third of that is the film industry. And but there's a kind of governance structure that exists, and there are 15 or so people that make up what's called the General Executive Board of IATSE. That includes the IATSE president, currently Matt Loeb, and the General Secretary Treasurer, who's sort of the right hand, and then 13 vice presidents. Each of those vice presidents have different realms. Like Mike Miller, for example, is in charge of the motion picture industry realm or department or division of IATSE. Overall, those 15 people, you might wonder, how do they get chosen, right? Have you ever voted for, the IATSE president? Again, this is the person who's in the room negotiating for us. I know you haven't, because you haven't been an IA delegate, and I haven't, because I haven't either. But I would like to be able to vote for the president and vote for these people who are representing us as leaders, right? So the way that works currently is every 4 years there's this convention. It's called the Quadrennial Convention because it does happen every 4 years. And the election of those people happens during the convention. So, like I said, you and I have not been able to vote for the president of IATSE. And they kind of raised the question, how would I be able to vote for the president of IATSE? And there's a path that you can go on to do that. You have to be elected as a delegate, right? And Local 600 has 100 delegate seats and votes available to us. Then the local can decide to send only a certain number of those delegates to actually represent all of the votes that we have to the convention. So in the example of Local 600, we only send 29 delegates to the convention. We could send more, we could send a full 100, but that number is decided on by the National Executive Board. In our case, the 7 national executive officers, the president, the couple of vice presidents, the secretary treasurer, assistant secretary treasurer, and sergeant at arms. I think those are the 7. They are the people who kind of automatically fill those slots, and the remainder are then allotted based on number of votes that you got as a delegate. So it's a little bit of a popularity contest to kind of get into those higher numbers of delegates to actually be sent. And the reason that a local might only choose to send a few number of people to represent their larger delegation is mainly money. It's pretty costly to get people to go to Hawaii, to put them up there, to compensate them for their time while they're there. And the international pays for a small portion of that. They'll cover airfare and a little stipend, but hotel rooms and food and kind of a little bit more reasonable compensation, other expenses, either fall to the delegate themselves or to the local. So you can imagine if you're a local that's less well off than Local 600, it can be pretty costly to send a delegate, and maybe not within your budget. So all the locals are kind of incentivized to keep those numbers small, which again disenfranchises more people because we have these 100 votes that are then being consolidated down to fewer and fewer. So let's say you do make it to the convention, right? You're one of the lucky few who are sent. Maybe you're a national officer, or you got a certain number of votes to be able to go. You go to the convention. It's like a week-long meeting, I guess, that happens over 5 days or so. And I think near the end of the convention, I've never been to a convention, so I'm just kind of recalling what I've heard from other people I've been in touch with. While you're there, there's lots of discussion about things that people might want to change. These are called resolutions. They're motions or ideas that people want to bring forward to the IA to direct it going forward, right? So it's like there's some great resolutions about changing all of the language in the Constitution to be gender neutral, or we want to spend money on this, or we don't want to spend money on that. Not super familiar with all of the things that have been passed, but those are kind of examples of what a resolution might look like. So people bring these resolutions to the floor, but in that process, there's also an election that happens. The president, the general secretary treasurer, and the 13 vice presidents and a couple of other trustees are all nominated and voted on at the convention. But the only people who can vote are the delegates who are there. So you have to be an elected delegate, you have to get a certain number of votes, you have to go to Hawaii, and then you can cast your ballot for any of these leadership positions. Obviously that's a lot of barriers, and is a pretty indirect representation of your vote and my vote and, regular members' voices. So I want to change that. Long story short.
Totally. Are there any mechanisms for like translating the will of the membership that then gets funneled down through these 29 or so delegates that do end up going? Is it like 13 of them will vote a certain way because the membership proportionally votes a certain way, or is it kind of up to them at that point?
It's completely up to them. Yeah, there's no formal mechanisms for this. It's up to the delegates to kind of self-organize, and often led by the president of the local, or maybe there's a group of officers of the local who will organize that. But they tend to want everybody to vote in a block because it gives that vote a little bit more strength, right? And there's strength in numbers, and you want to be able to kind of form coalitions. But it's in no way explicitly representative. There's no, as far as I recall, there's no like attempt to reach out to members to say, hey, what do you want to happen, going forward? It's mostly just whatever the delegates are feeling or have heard from people themselves and bringing to the table and fighting for. And the votes, though, I should say, there's a difference between the voting on the resolutions that happens at the convention and the votes for the president. Each delegate themselves is allotted a certain portion of the votes from the local, and I think the local decides how they split that up. So the president might get 28 votes, and then each of the other people might get 1 vote or something like that for electing the officers. But together, if there's a resolution being passed as it stands right now, it's just a yay or nay kind of vocal vote, which I've heard can be very hard to keep track of, very unclear who's representing how many votes, especially if you have some delegates who do represent 50 votes and some delegates who represent 1 vote. They have the same loudness of their voice. So how do you really determine who voted for what in that context? Anyway, it's all kind of hairy and to me needs a lot more transparency, a lot more democracy, a lot more input from members, and an accountability, right? Like, I think there's an issue here where, we don't really know what those people are doing when they go to the convention. We don't know what they're advocating for, and we don't know how they voted. And I then have no idea how to vote for delegates next time they are elected. Right. And you kind of want a system that, is similar to the U.S. government, where every vote on any bill in the House and the Senate is recorded, who voted what on what side of that initiative. And you can then, when it comes time for the election, decide, oh, well, my representative didn't vote the way that I wanted them to, so I'm going to vote them out and go for somebody else. That system doesn't exist in this context. So I'd like to
Got it.
that as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a system where it would be very easy to, if you have enough strength yourself, it'd be very easy to kind of manipulate the system a little bit. If the membership is feeling a certain way, like let's say hypothetically, most of 600 is unhappy with the president, and then we send those delegates there, and then let's say the president within those delegates might be the loudest person in the room there, and then that will doesn't get translated all the way up into the votes for the leadership there. At least what you're saying in the way that this country works, you can turn on C-SPAN, right, and you can see the vote tallies there. So at least there's a little bit of that. I mean, there's obviously tons and tons of issues with how this entire country is run, but at least there's a little bit of that there. It feels to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels to me like it almost doesn't matter how I feel about our organization or leadership, because they're more or less able to just kind of do whatever they want at that level. Is that off base at all?
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something. I have no evidence that anybody has been manipulating the system, and I don't, I can't say that there's been any bad actors in in that system. And I can only hope that people are listening to their members and acting in a good way to represent them. But there's definitely room for that abuse of the power. And, I do think that we want that accountability so that people can know how to cast their votes, can be more engaged. And just the fact, like a C-SPAN is a great example of something that we do want to have for these conventions. It seems like there's no reason that I shouldn't be able to go and watch on Zoom how the convention proceeds. And the fact that I have to, I've spent the last 6 to 8 months researching all of this to understand, talking to a lot of people to understand how this system works. It's like, you take like a graduate level course in like civics, basically, to like understand how our governance exists. That's a high bar of to expect our members to meet in order to become involved at all or to engage with the system. And it's very, very easy to check out and totally understandable to check out, because it's just like, all right, well, nobody's going to listen to me anyway. I might as well not vote, or I might as well not be involved, or throw my vote randomly, or whatever. It's just, I think that's the real sadness of it, when people check out and just kind of let it be because there are blockades to their engagement.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about the different ways that you would like to see this changed, and if you have any sort of specific, action points that, that you'd like to see going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I want to highlight, actually, before we get to the specific things, is there the process that I've started to understand for how to get a resolution passed and brought to the convention at all. So in reading through the Constitution and talking with other people in other locals, we've kind of pieced together that if you want to pass something specific, right, you actually can get it to the convention floor at least. And this is done by rallying delegates, whether or not you are a delegate, to sign on to a specific resolution. So all that it requires is a majority of delegates from a single local to sign on to something to then get it brought to the convention floor. So if you're a pretty small local, let's say you've got 200 members in your local, then you've got 3 votes, right? 3 delegates who will be elected. Maybe you're only going to send one, but you've got 3 people who are elected delegates, right? If you get 2 of those people to sign on to a resolution, then that resolution, and you send it to the office, if that resolution will be heard on the convention floor. That's kind of exciting, right? That's like a cool way to get around that all that bureaucracy and say like, okay, like we want to at least talk about this thing, right? A lot more organizing is needed to get people to vote for a resolution, but it's at least possible to get it heard and talked about and get the debate going, which I think is a cool superpower that a larger local like ours does not allow for, because it's not that it doesn't allow for it. It's harder, right? Because we would need 50 people to sign on to something. But realizing that kind of launched an idea for me and for others in the group that I'm working with to come up with a list of resolutions that we think would be good, that would be structural changes. And I emphasize these structural changes because, like I said earlier, I think it's important to kind of rebuild the governance structure before we get into I want this policy or I want this detail in our contract negotiated, right? And then once we do that, we're going to have better contracts and stronger contracts as a result, because they'll be more reflective of the members' opinions and the really huge solidarity that we could harness, right? So the specific changes I want to see are part of a platform that we call the STAND platform. It's supporting transparency, accountability, new ideas, and democracy. And this is a list of 11 resolutions that we want to bring to the convention floor. And we're kind of working to organize delegates across any local, all locals if possible, to support these resolutions. So the main one I would say is direct member voting for our leadership. Is something we were talking about earlier, where the process is very hard to even be able to vote for the leaders. We just want to completely open that up, and we obviously have the technology to run an international digital election. And I basically took all of the rules that exist in Local 600's election, which I actually think is a pretty good and transparent election process, and converted that into the IATSE context, and rewrote a large swath of the IATSE Constitution to create this new election structure. So that's probably the number one most important part of the platform, because that allows people to be engaged and voting for their leadership. And to become an actual democracy, right? Another kind of key aspect is, this eliminating the electoral college for contract ratification that we were talking about. So that would just mean for all contracts, any contract IATSE negotiates, whether it's a single local or the Hollywood bargaining unit, that it needs to be ratified by a majority of those members affected by that contract. So that's kind of an easy change. And then another one is to bring roll call voting to the convention, or a hybrid way of attending the convention, because not only is it costly to go to Hawaii, for some people it's just physically impossible because of a disability they might have, or it can be
an impediment of some sort to be able to physically attend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And
what is just while I have you here on this, what is roll call voting? Like, how does that work?
Oh yeah. Sorry. So yeah, that's what we were talking about with how the U.S. representatives their votes are counted. A roll call vote just means that every single vote is counted and a name associated with that vote. I think in Congress, they do it with an electronic system, so they can easily just press a button, yes or no, and then that's tabulated automatically. So, but in some cases, they'll individually, it's called a roll call vote, because before there were electronic systems, they would call out the name of each participant and ask them yay or nay, and then record that. Got to have that for accountability, right? Got to have a hybrid way of attending the convention for accessibility. We want to institute a C-SPAN-like experience for the convention so that it can be broadcast to any IA member. Yeah, there's a whole swath of things we want to change. So, yeah.
Oh, totally. So this group you're talking about, this is CREW, right? The Caucus of Rank and File Entertainment Workers. Do I have that right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's a caucus, which is a group of people who are organized together around similar ideas, and it's focused on, like you said, rank and file entertainment workers, CREW, CREW. And the cool thing about it is that it's across locals. So it's not just Local 600. It's also not just the film industry. We have people from the theater industry, from the live event industries, and it's been a really cool way to connect with people in those other fields and other crafts and other industries, with all the same goal, right? And what we want is transparency, accountability, and democracy across IATSE, right? So I've really taken a lot of joy in working with those people, and it's nice to be among people who are like-minded. The other thing that I find great about it is the way that the meetings are run among that group are the way that I would want to see union meetings run. And it should really just be an open conversation that's interested in hearing from every single person who wants to participate. It's an environment that encourages productive debate. It always feels like a safe space to express any ideas, and there's just a lot of listening and respect that I've seen in that process, in that group, that's felt really good. And I think in that image, we want to kind of craft, our unions like that as well.
Amazing. Yeah, it's, I think I ended up finding like the fact that you were running and finding out like your platform through seeing, IATSE CREW post their platform on Instagram and other places. How can people get involved with that organization?
Yeah, so if you're interested in joining the CREW, you can go to iatsecrew.com and click Join the CREW. There's a button in the top right. And we're interested in bringing on people who are reform-minded and want to bring about these kind of changes we've been talking about. And then you can start attending the meetings, and there's so much to do in terms of organizing. One thing I realized, we just had a meeting yesterday, and one thing I've realized is there's just so much work to be done, and we need people to kind of constantly be volunteering to take on that work. It's often contacting people, bringing more people into the caucus, but also reaching out to delegates or potential delegates. It's promoting this platform of ideas. It's getting people together because there's strength in numbers and solidarity. And it's so that one person doesn't have to kind of stick their neck out and be ostracized on their own. They have a kind of support group to talk amongst.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. I'm very excited to see what sort of reform you guys can bring to the table. Okay, so that all sounds fantastic. We've spent a good chunk talking about IATSE. Can you tell us more about what specifically you'd like to do within 600, and if there's anything within 600 that maybe membership should be aware of and thinking about going forward?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like member engagement is probably the number one issue facing our union, and something that I think could be remedied by better outreach from leadership to the rank and file members through surveys. We've experienced kind of once every 3 years, we'll have a survey as it pertains to the contracts, but we never see those results. And we never really know what everybody else in the local is thinking. It all kind of does come down to what you're hearing on social media or from your friends, which can perpetuate maybe misinformation or just rumors or something like that. So I think a clearer communication from the local that is not just outward, here's what we think is the reality of the situation, but also inviting members into that through surveying them. And we could do monthly membership surveys and then report back those results to people. And I think that will engage people by asking them to participate in a very simple, easy way. Hey, what's your opinion on this, right? And then saying, here's what everybody else thinks, right away. That's really validating when you see, oh, other people think the same thing as me. Or it can help you kind of come around if you see, oh, well, maybe I'm alone in that opinion. That's interesting. And then you might talk to somebody else to learn why your opinion might differ from other people's. So I think that sort of communication structure is probably the biggest thing. It seems like we would really benefit from building a strike fund. I'm kind of new to the concept and the idea of how it would work, but it seems like by cutting back expenses within the local, especially at a time where a lot of our members are struggling financially, and just even to keep up with the dues, it would make sense for the local itself to kind of, trim back and to put some of that savings towards a strike fund, especially when we are now, we still have, 2.5 years until the next contract cycle. We have some time to kind of build that momentum and to be able to, not necessarily to encourage a strike, because I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding or misconception of what a strike fund does, but instead to kind of build power and solidarity in a moment where we might need to strike, where it can support members if they have to not work in order to get better work in the future. So I think that's a priority financially, but I'll admit I'm not very tuned into what the finances of the local are. So I need to do some more research and get a better understanding of where the numbers can move, right? And I'm hoping that by being on the board, I can get more involved in that, learn more about it, and then have some influence into, how members' money is spent, and hopefully spend it really carefully and responsibly on these things that matter towards our contracts and towards our actual work. I think that we should have a roll call vote for our national executive board for the same reasons I was talking about roll call voting in the convention.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely. I mean, like a hardship fund, strike fund, all that. It is a topic that has been very, top of mind recently with the state of the industry. There's a lot less work going around, a lot more people are suffering, and I'm going to paraphrase, but there's a great saying, civilization should be judged by how it treats its poorest members.
Yes.
Something along those lines. Yeah. And, I recently have had numerous friends that, for example, needed a few extra hours to get their health insurance, and they weren't able to get those hours, and they lost out on health insurance. I'm not the expert on how, 600 handles health insurance, but it's always kind of, like I've never quite understood why there isn't a little bit more help for the people that have the hardest time with that. It seems like it's a system that rewards the people that work the most, and then it kind of makes it like a popularity contest to an extent. Whereas, everyone still pays the same dues, everyone works, and maybe it's not just health insurance, but that's the one that's kind of top of mind.
Yeah, we should talk about health insurance, because that is a whole...
Yeah, that might be a long conversation, but things that help the people that need help the most, and that's just something that makes sense to me. Like, isn't that what a union is supposed to do?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, luckily we do have what's called the health preserver list. So if you or your friends are in that position of just needing a few hours to be able to qualify for the health insurance, you can through the union's website sign up for the health preserver list. And theoretically, people who are kind enough to be looking at that list and hiring, and in a position where they can hire people either to fill in for a couple of days or onto a job in general, can go to that list and make sure that people who are so close to getting qualified can do so. But I will say, in terms of like the bigger picture of the difficulty of qualifying for health insurance, I've been a member since 2016. I've only qualified for 2 6-month periods in that time, and it sucks, right? It's like, how do I, you have to pay
there.
pocket, right? Yeah. So, and I think most DPs are in that position specifically because we do tend to work a lot less than the rest of the camera department. But even the camera department works a lot less than other crafts. So I see basically just one fix for this, and it's universal healthcare. And I know it's not going to happen on the national stage, especially given current politics, anytime soon. But there is a bill in California state and in New York state that are very close to passing the state senates for single-payer healthcare in both of those realms. And if that got passed, I think it would provide a ton of leverage to in our negotiating. It would essentially eliminate the need for our collective health insurance plan to exist at all, and it seems like a win-win. Like the producers win because then they don't have to pay as much, or if it was national at all, into the health insurance plan, which is making the work very expensive, and one of the reasons that they're not wanting to shoot in the U.S., but and in California and in New York specifically. But it's also a win for the unions, right? Because then we don't have to have that as a bargaining chip, and we can really just focus on living wages and work conditions, which I think are the things people actually want to be negotiating for, not to fund our health insurance. So there's a fix.
Yeah, I mean, health insurance tied to employment is a whole can of worms that that we could get into. I mean,
huge problem.
My background is Czech, and going to Europe and visiting my family and just seeing how simple the healthcare is there.
Yep.
I'm like, there's that, what was it, the phrase the other day that I read? It was like, oh, universal health insurance is so difficult that only 36 out of 37 developed nations have figured it out. Like something along those lines.
Yep.
And it's just, it's crazy to me. It's crazy that, the richest country on the planet can't take care of its citizens. But
so true.
That, that's probably a can of worms for another 6-hour episode at some point. Is there anything else in your, in your platform about crew, about like what you want to do within the union that you'd like to discuss before I ask a couple kind of final questions?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think just like overall, I'm looking for a cultural shift. And it's one that is much more open to member feedback and people asking questions and making all this information that our union has available to anybody who asks or is interested to find out. I'm kind of tired of the blockades to information. There's a lot of research and data points that have been collected and exist, but members haven't seen it. I haven't seen it, and I would like to put eyes on those things. So I just want to inform people and educate everybody and be encouraging of people's curiosities to dig into how and why and what things are happening. So. Fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, for the record, I am very pro-union. I'm very pro-union on paper. And when I get frustrated about certain things and see how some of these things are run, and I complain about it, and we're sitting here talking about this, it's because I care. It's because the industry can do better, our unions can do better, the people can do better, and without people pushing that forward, it's not going to get any better. So, again, very pro-union, but lots of things need to change and be made, be improved.
Absolutely.
So I kind of want to just ask, maybe, as we're winding down, more of like a broad question. So I have this theory over the next decade or so. I do think that we might be entering a new golden age of indie film.
Cool.
I think people are tired of the Marvel films, or it's like Thor 12, Avengers 50. Like, I can't even keep up. I stopped watching a few years ago. It's just all the same stuff to me.
Yep.
But I do see these amazing films coming out. Like Barbarian's a great example, and a few others over the last few years that have come out that have been really original with risky stories. Maybe they're $10 million, $5 to $15 million, and they're making multiples of their budgets. we're seeing genre films really take off. You know, the horror realm, which I work in mostly, has really been taking off. So part of talking about this union stuff and the leadership stuff is that, you know, we need these organizations to adapt and be forward looking so that we can do things like work on smaller projects and make them successful. You know, there might be some mandatory staffing things that could create a problem on a tiny film. And that story just won't get told because the union isn't super flexible about that stuff. There's concerns about productions going overseas. You know, now we have all this tariff stuff happening. You know, are those productions going to come back? Or are we just going to be flying overseas to shoot movies? At which point this whole union conversation is moot to begin with.
Yep.
You know, so like I would love to see production coming back to the US. I would love to see more voices being heard, more stories being told. And I do truly think that there is a way forward. I'm just not 100% sure exactly how, but I will be here, you know, trying to figure that out. What do you think about that prediction?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there's, there's definitely going to be another wave of indie films because the larger projects are just not as exciting, you know, in terms of the storytelling, right? And then in terms of how to bring the production back to the U.S., I think we need a federal tax incentive. It needs to be like coming from the U.S. government. I could see like a 10%, you know, U.S. tax incentive and universal healthcare. Put those two together, and I think, you know, immediately all the production comes right back.
Very low bar to clear, right?
Yeah, I know that's a lot to ask, but like, you know, the federal government has money and the states don't as much, and it would just make it instantly competitive. And I think there's a lot of value to the economy to having film production staying here, not just in New York and LA, which I think are obviously the hubs and the hubs. I mean, New York is what I care most about. For the record, I have not shot in New York in like 5 years, 6 years. And I live
pretty much the same for me. Yeah.
That's a problem. Like, what the heck? So, you know, and it's a problem because I love working with the crew that I came up with, right? As I'm sure you do. And I love to not be away from my wife and dog, right? And I'd love to have a life and shoot at the same time. That would be great. I think that the way to bring that back is through health insurance and through universal health insurance and through a federal tax incentive. But I also think that you're right. The unions do need to become more flexible about these kind of things, and it's tricky because I've been hearing from members who I feel camaraderie with about. We've let in too many people, right? There are too many members coming into the 600, and that makes it even more difficult to vie for jobs and to qualify for the health insurance, right? So, but I'm also of the mind we need to unionize more and smaller productions to bring in more members. And if we could have a situation where literally every production is a union production, right, then there'd just be no such thing as non-union work, and we would all be working under these theoretically better contracts and be supported by a very large group of people to have better working conditions. And I don't know, maybe it's idealistic because there are obviously restrictions on that and difficulties of unionizing, especially a very short-term production, but yeah, if you were to, flip everybody, then you'd have a situation like SAG. And I think SAG, isn't perfect in any way, but they at least have, pretty much every actor who's working is a SAG member, right? And you can do a tiny, tiny student film and still be on SAG's radar, and still be ultra low budget, shoestring budget, SAG, whatever contract. But at least that sets some standard for people at that level to be getting treated fairly, taken care of on set, and then you can grow from there, right? And it doesn't seem like SAG is hurting by having, however many members they have, right? And then similarly, actually, this also affects working abroad, right? If you have as many members as SAG does, right, and a production goes abroad, then anybody is going to have to be a union member, right? So it's going to have to be under that contract, and the producers wouldn't be able to, or the studios wouldn't be able to skirt the system or get outside the jurisdiction of IATSE by just shooting abroad. So I think just broadening our scope and broadening the horizons would help a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like there are just a lot of things that can be done, and where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah. It's tricky. I think that you have to have a collective will, right? It's like one thing for me to want it and for you to want it. But I think there's like these proper channels, and then there's like unintended consequences and all these other things that you gotta, I feel like I need to learn about and educate myself on so that I can really know with confidence that the idea that I'm pushing is realistic and achievable and actually gonna have some good benefits.
That's fantastic. I think that's a great place to end. What I would ask is, if you're talking to a non-union person in this industry, and if you're talking to a union member in this industry, what are some kind of final closing words that you would say to them right now?
I would say to the non-union person, this may be controversial, but to the non-union person, don't join the union until you really need to. I think take your time. I found myself as a union member sooner than I was ready for, and have been paying dues and paid an enormous initiation fee way earlier than I should have. And again, did not get the benefits of health insurance until much later, after paying those dues for a long time. So take your time, and I would also say to join in the classification that you want to be working in, because you can, as you and I have been pigeonholed in a genre of film, everybody gets kind of pigeonholed in the type of work that they do. And if you become known for being a camera assistant, then you will be a camera assistant. And if you become known for being a DP, then you will be a DP. So if you're already a member of Local 600, I really recommend getting involved and trying to learn more about our governance, about what mechanisms there are for change, and to just be talking with as many other union members as you can, whether or not they are involved in leadership or not. I know that can be a hard ask because I've been asked to do the same, and it can be challenging to get real information. But keep asking the questions. Don't be discouraged, and I don't know. Keep trying, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Reach out to me. Reach out to me. Reach out to us.
Yeah.
Like I think that's actually the real thing, right? Like if you have questions, talk to people who are willing to answer them, and I am willing to answer them. So please ask me those questions.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, how can people reach you?
You can reach me on Instagram at Zach Kuperstein. Feel free to follow me and send me a DM, and we can start talking.
Amazing. Well, that's how we met. So that seems to work. All right. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for your time and for all your insights. This has been a wonderful episode. And thanks again.